coming back, that's for sure.
Every decision you make is going to affect a lot of other people. Even though you may not see them or don't know them, there's a lot of people involved in this network. I'd rather for you to take it than anybody else take it.
Yeah, it's a big responsibility, but I definitely want it.
Do you think you know Tim Smith and Stephen Ray Tickle beyond the highlight reels? Think again. Moonshiners gave you the smoky stills, the dangerous chases, the Appalachian grit. But it didn't always show the price paid when the cameras stopped rolling. This isn't just a story about brewing liquor in the backwoods. It's about craft meeting commerce, family colliding with fame, and the heavy silence between each season's edits. The truth: the show didn't always capture it. Sometimes it couldn't. Sometimes it wouldn't. And Tim and Tickle, two of the series' most recognizable faces, carried more than the producers ever wanted you to see. Today we're pulling back the curtain on Moonshiners. We'll trace where Tim and Tickle came from, how the show built its legend, and the cracks that widened as reality clashed with reality TV. We'll look at the pressures, the flashpoints, and the legacy that remains. Let's find out what Tim and Tickle didn't want you to know, and why they kept it quiet. Stay tuned. So what happened before the cameras ever started rolling? To understand why Tim Smith became the face of Moonshiners, you need to picture the Blue Ridge Mountains where he grew up. The rolling green ridges, the mist rising in the valleys at dawn, the roads twisting like spilled ribbon. For generations, those hills weren't just scenery, they were survival. Families carved out lives from the land, and when times got lean, ingenuity filled the gaps. Distilling corn into clear liquid gold wasn't rebellion. It was heritage. Tim's family carried that legacy. His father and grandfather had both known the craft. It was passed down in hushed instructions, in recipes scrawled on worn paper, in the careful adjustments of flame and copper. To a boy like Tim, the still was less a piece of equipment and more a monument. It glowed with mystery. One memory sticks. A cool night in Franklin County, smoke curling from a makeshift pipe. Tim crouched in the shadows as his elders checked the drip of clear liquid from the spout. He was supposed to stay silent, but his senses roared awake. The smell of corn mash fermenting, the metallic tang of copper, the hiss of water cooling the coil. He would never forget it. By the time he was grown, moonshine was both a story and a skill he carried. But here's the thing, Tim wasn't reckless. He didn't want to end up another cautionary tale. He worked real jobs, built a family, and tried to keep the old ways alive without losing his footing in the modern world. For Tim, tradition and legality were always colliding forces. Then came Stephen Ray Tickle. Known simply as Tickle, he was a different breed, boisterous, free-spirited, quick with a laugh. Where Tim was measured, Tickle was explosive. His connection to moonshine wasn't just family history, it was personality. Tickle seemed born for a camera, even before one ever found him. Tickle came from Virginia too, steeped in the same culture, of secrecy and survival. For him, moonshining was half livelihood, half legend. He carried the charisma of a local folk hero, the kind of man people whispered about at gas stations and back porches. He can turn anything into a still, one neighbor joked. Probably his car if he wanted. Together, Tim and Tickle represented two sides of Appalachian tradition. One the careful steward of legacy, the other the unpredictable flame. But how did two men from Backroads, Virginia end up on a nationally broadcast show? And why did their lives change so drastically once the cameras arrived? The early 2010s saw cable television hungry for grit. Discovery Channel had found success with shows like Deadliest Catch and Gold Rush, programs that combined real work with high drama. The formula was simple: take a dangerous job, put cameras in places viewers had never seen, and let the tension write itself. Moonshining seemed tailor-made, illegal, colorful, steeped in history. How could audiences resist? The producers wanted authenticity, and they found it in Tim Smith. Tim wasn't just a moonshiner, he was articulate, proud of his heritage, and willing to bridge the line between tradition and modern legality. He was the elder who could lend gravitas. Then there was Tickle. In casting terms, he was lightning in a bottle. Wild, unpredictable, funny in ways that seemed almost scripted, but weren't. Viewers would believe him because he was impossible not to watch. Where Tim brought credibility, Tickle brought chaos. The first season of Moonshiners launched in 2011. Almost overnight, it became a phenomenon. Audiences leaned in, not just for the liquor, but for the lives behind it. Tim's scenes often carried weight. His determination to preserve family craft, his attempts to balance danger with respect. Tickle's scenes gave spark, whether he was cracking jokes mid-still or stumbling through harebrained schemes. Here's the thing, though. The show walked a razor's edge. Viewers were told they were watching real outlaw operations unfold in real time. Authorities in Virginia publicly questioned the premise, saying no actual illegal liquor was being produced on camera. Discovery leaned into the ambiguity, insisting it was documentary storytelling. And that's where the tension began. Were Tim and Tickle craftsmen or characters? Were they living their lives or playing them? So what happens when reality collides with the producer's cut? Anyone who's watched Moonshiners knows the editing hums with urgency, suspenseful music, quick cuts between bubbling mash and headlights cresting a ridge, a sheriff's cruiser idling just out of sight. But talk to anyone close to the production, and a different picture emerges. Reportedly, many sequences were reshot for clarity. A spill might be replayed from multiple angles. A chase scene might be stitched together from several days. That doesn't mean Tim and Tickle weren't really working, but it does mean the TV version wasn't always the same as the lived one. Here's the thing about moonshining. The process is slow. It takes hours for mash to ferment, for stills to drip. There are long stretches of waiting. On screen, those hours became minutes. Editing trimmed reality into entertainment, and sometimes the edits shifted more than pacing. Take Tickle's reputation. On TV, he was portrayed as reckless to the point of comedy, often bumbling into mistakes that Tim had to fix. Friends of Tickle insist he was more skilled than that the fool persona was emphasized because it made for good TV. Tickle himself later admitted that what you saw was only part of the truth. For Tim, the edits carried a different weight. His role as the elder statesman of Shine was highlighted, but his day-to-day struggles, financial strain, community tension, the difficulty of moving into legal distilling, were often smoothed over. Viewers saw determination. They didn't always see the exhaustion behind it. There's an ethical line here. Reality TV thrives on exaggeration. But what happens when exaggeration cements into public perception? When fans think Tickle is a clown or Tim is untouchable? Even more complicated. What about the legal gray area? Discovery never clarified whether actual illegal liquor was produced on camera. For Tim and Tickle, that ambiguity was both shield and shackle. It made them famous, but it also meant every word, every action was scrutinized by fans, by law enforcement, and by neighbors. So what happens when the rules of TV clash with the rules of real moonshine life? To understand that, you have to know how moonshining actually operates. Unlike the tidy packages on store shelves, backwoods shine lives and dies by logistics. Grain and sugar have to be bought quietly. Water sources have to be reliable. Copper stills have to be built, hidden, maintained.
Why not? I'm always on the road anyway.
With the steel in the back?
Why not?
I don't know. This is kind of dangerous.
A batch can take a week from mash to jar. Then there's the law. In the U.S., producing distilled spirits without a license is illegal. Licenses require permits, taxes, inspections. For generations, many Appalachian families avoided them, either because they couldn't afford the fees or because secrecy was safer. For Tim, the path forward was unusual. He worked to go legit. His dream was to transform family heritage into a legal distillery. That meant navigating red tape, convincing investors, and branding Shine in a way that honored its roots without risking prison. For Tickle, The relationship to legality was looser. He often leaned into the outlaw image, comfortable with the blurred lines that television thrived on. The logistics of filming only complicated things further. Crews needed access to remote sites. Schedules had to match the unpredictable pace of distilling. Producers wanted drama, but real distilling is repetitive, dirty, and often dull. Bridging those contradictions was a constant battle. And here's the catch. Every choice had consequences. Fame opened doors. It also brought scrutiny. What once thrived in shadows now glared under spotlights. So how did the spotlight begin to wear them down, physically and mentally? Here's the thing about moonshining. It's not glamorous, no matter how slick the editing makes it look. The process is labor-intensive, physically draining, and emotionally taxing. For Tim and Tickle, that toll built up season after season, even as the cameras tried to smooth it into drama. Picture this: a December night deep in Virginia backcountry. The air is knife-cold, the kind that stings lungs with every breath. Tim grips a flashlight, boots sinking in half-frozen mud, as he checks the line running from mash barrel to condenser. Each step crunches like breaking glass. The camera crew keeps their distance, equipment fogging in the damp air. What viewers saw later was a brief clip of determination. What they didn't feel was the ache in Tim's knees, the bone-deep fatigue of a man balancing family life with endless work. Tickle carried a different kind of burden. On screen, his larger-than-life antics made him look carefree. Off-screen, that same persona demanded constant upkeep. Fans expected humor, recklessness, a man who never worried. But no one can live as their TV character indefinitely. In interviews, Tickle admitted to exhaustion, long shoots, constant pressure to perform, and the knowledge that millions were judging him not as a craftsman but as a caricature. Then there was the risk. Distilling illegally is dangerous in ways viewers rarely saw. Copper stills can explode if pressure builds too fast. Fires start from one stray spark. Long nights in remote woods invite accidents, slips, falls, exposure. One misstep could mean injury miles from help. And let's not forget the mental strain. When your livelihood depends on secrecy, suddenly living in the public eye feels contradictory. For Tim, fame brought questions at the grocery store, at church, from neighbors. Was he really making shine on camera? How much of it was real? Each question carried unspoken judgment. For Tickle, scrutiny came harsher. His reputation on the show made him a magnet for gossip. Every stumble, every rumor amplified online. Being a fan favorite was double-edged. The adoration was real, but so was the criticism. The human body can handle hard work. What's harder to carry is the constant demand to live as both man and myth. So how did these pressures ripple through their closest relationships, into family and friends who never signed up for the spotlight? Moonshining has always been about family. Recipes passed from fathers to sons, skills taught in whispers, still sites chosen on land trusted for generations. For Tim, family wasn't just background, it was the reason he chased legitimacy. He wanted his son to grow up proud, not shadowed by secrecy. But here's where it gets complicated. Television magnifies private lives. Tim's loved ones weren't just family anymore. They became part of the show's mythology. Every decision Tim made on screen carried echoes at home. Long days of filming meant time away from his wife and child. Success at building a legal distillery meant financial strain and public attention. Family dinners turned into conversations about contracts, investors, and critics. Tickle's family life was more turbulent. The show painted him as a bachelor rogue, but behind the scenes, he was still a son, a partner, and later, a father. Balancing that with his on-screen persona was no easy feat. Loved ones had to weather the fallout of his fame, the whispers, the legal troubles, the long absences. Friends and neighbors played roles too. In tight Appalachian communities, loyalty is everything. Some saw pride in seeing one of their own on national television. Others felt unease, fearing exposure or resenting the spotlight. Trust, once simple, grew fragile. Still, both men leaned heavily on their inner circles. When exhaustion hit, when cameras left, it was family and old friends who helped steady them. The irony? Those were the very people audiences rarely saw. The most important relationships stayed off screen, not because they didn't matter, but because they mattered too much. So how did money, branding, and fame reshape that delicate balance between authenticity and exposure? By its third season, Moonshiners was more than a TV show. It was a brand. Merchandise appeared, t-shirts, hats, mugs emblazoned with slogans. For Tim and Tickle, that meant opportunity, but also compromise. Tim used the visibility to launch his legal venture, Tim Smith's Climax Moonshine. Bottled, taxed, and sold across state lines, it was his way of carrying tradition into the mainstream without risking prison. That transition took grit, navigating state alcohol boards, convincing distributors, managing cash flow. Fame opened doors, but running a legitimate business brought new headaches. Taxes don't bend for tradition. Tickle leaned into appearances, festivals, conventions, meet and greets. His face became shorthand for the outlaw charm the show sold. Fans lined up for photos, autographs, stories. It was income, yes, but it also meant being Tickle 24/7. The mask rarely came off. Here's the trade-off. The more they leaned into branding, the further they drifted from the original craft. The private, messy, risky process of moonshining became a polished commodity. In some ways they gained control, in others, they lost it. So what happened when the balance finally tipped, when one flashpoint made it impossible to hide the cracks? Every long-running show has a turning point. For Moonshiners, one of the clearest came with Tickle's legal troubles. Over the years, Tickle faced multiple arrests, reportedly for driving violations, possession charges, and probation issues. The details varied, but the pattern was undeniable. The larger-than-life character collided with real-world consequences. One scene stands out in memory. Cameras didn't capture it, but local news did. Tickle, once the grinning face of Appalachian outlaw lore, standing before a judge in a courthouse, expression subdued. The headlines were blunt, stripping away the humor fans associated with him. Suddenly, the reckless clown image wasn't just entertainment, it was evidence. For Tim, the flashpoint was quieter, but just as heavy. The transition to legal distilling came with backlash. Critics said he'd sold out. Others doubted his shine was authentic if it came with barcodes and shelf space. Fans wanted the outlaw mystique, but investors demanded compliance. Tim stood in the middle, pulled both ways. Both men found themselves caught in contradictions the show never fully acknowledged. The outlaw charm that made them famous also carried real costs: legal, financial, personal. So what happened once the public knew and perception shifted? When Tickle's arrests hit headlines, fan reactions split sharply. Some rallied to his side, insisting he was a good man caught in mistakes. Others shrugged, saying the show had always painted him reckless. Social media magnified both sides, every post dissected. The line between character and person blurred until it was almost erased. Tim weathered his storms differently. His push into legality won respect from industry peers but frustration from old-school shiners. To some, he was proof tradition could adapt. To others, he symbolized the death of moonshine as they knew it. Online debates flared. Was he preserving or betraying heritage? The show's producers leaned into both narratives. Drama sells, redemption arcs keep viewers hooked. But the reality beneath was messier, men grappling with choices no edit could simplify. So what then did viewers never see? What remained off camera, unspoken, even as millions tuned in? This might be the most important part. What wasn't shown wasn't always scandal. Often it was banality, pain, or bureaucracy that simply didn't fit the outlaw adventure mold. Take The Drudgery, Distilling involves hours of waiting, scrubbing, hauling. Cameras rarely lingered on Tim cleaning a sticky barrel or Tickle wrestling with a busted coil. Yet those moments made up most of the work, or the bureaucracy. Tim's legal distilling venture demanded mountains of paperwork, tax filings, compliance forms, meetings with regulators. Viewers saw bottles on shelves. They didn't see the night spent hunched over forms, eyes burning under fluorescent light. And then there's grief. Both men faced personal losses and struggles, but the show stayed silent. Reality TV thrives on conflict, not quiet sorrow. But real life doesn't play by TV rules. The decision not to show these parts wasn't necessarily sinister. Producers chose what kept ratings high. But it means the audience never saw the full picture, the real costs carried quietly off camera. So what does all this add up to? What legacy remains, and what does it mean for the tradition they represented? When the dust of controversy settles, the real question is always, what remains? For Tim and Tickle, the legacy of Moonshiners is complicated but undeniable. They didn't just star on a show. They became symbols of a tradition America had almost forgotten. Tim's legacy rests on transformation. By steering his craft toward legitimacy, he proved that moonshine could leap from hidden hollows to store shelves without losing its soul. That journey was messy, full of red tape, criticism, and compromise. But step back, and you see a man determined to carry his grandfather's recipes into the 21st century. That's not betrayal, it's evolution. There's an image worth holding. A bottle of Climax moonshine sitting on a polished bar in New York City. Next to it, a jar of homemade shine on a weathered porch in Franklin County. Both contain the same spirit. Both trace back to the same hills. Tim bridged that gap. He forced viewers to confront the line between outlaw and entrepreneur, between heritage and commerce. Tickle's legacy is different. He represents the spirit of the outlaw folk hero, the man who refused to be tamed by legality or image. His antics made him beloved. His struggles made him real. For all the controversy, fans still talk about Tickle with a kind of affection rarely seen in reality TV. He wasn't perfect, but that imperfection made him human. Together, Tim and Tickle carried the contradictions of moonshining onto the national stage. They reminded us that tradition isn't clean, that heritage can't always be packaged neatly, and maybe that's the truest thing about their story. So what does it all mean when the credits fade and the cameras pack away? Here's the thing. Moonshiners was never just about liquor. It was about resilience, about communities scraping survival from rocky soil, about families passing down secrets that meant more than money, about men and women caught between the past and the present, forced to decide which parts of heritage to keep and which to let go. Tim and Tickle embodied those crossroads. One leaned toward legitimacy, the other held fast to myth. Both paid prices the show rarely admitted, and yet both left marks that endure. Think about it. How many viewers, before the show, really understood the patience and danger behind a jar of clear liquor? How many knew that Appalachia's hidden economy still pulsed beneath its ridges? How many would have cared had Tim and Tickle not opened that world, flawed, dramatized, but undeniably theirs? Their story reminds us that reality TV edits can distort, but they can't erase truth entirely. Beneath the suspenseful music and exaggerated cuts, there was always real sweat, real danger, real heart. And that's the paradox. What Tim and Tickle didn't want you to know wasn't scandal alone. It was the exhaustion, the grief, the bureaucracy, the contradictions that couldn't be squeezed into a 42-minute episode. They carried that weight so the show could carry on. When you strip the edits away, what's left is a simple image. Two men standing in a clearing, a copper still hissing beside them, the scent of mash thick in the air. One dreams of bottling it for shelves. The other laughs, insisting the old ways will never die. Both, in their own way, are right. If this deep dive gave you a different angle on Tim and Tickle, tap the like button, share it with a friend who remembers Moonshiners, and hit subscribe for more untold stories. What moment in their journey changed your view the most? And what side of the story do you think the cameras never showed? Drop your thoughts in the comments.